Chapter 31. Hayland Green's house squatted before the Akarn spy like a gigantic green, orange, red, and blue frog ready to leap. This frog-like appearance was undoubtedly by design, as the grounds were manicured to resemble a massive lily pad, complete with strategically placed paths and a grove of white blossoming trees that mimicked a lily pad's bloom. The house sat at the center of the lily pad, its middle structure towering over two adjoining buildings, all of which had rounded roofs, adding to the frog-like facade. The frog's toes were large, trimmed bushes that grew at the base of the smaller buildings. Flanking the prominent double-door entrance were wide windows, tinted red, and over 2 stories high. They reminded Kessa of a frog's eyes, stalking that passing fly. She would have found the house delightful and innovative, if she didn't feel like it was about to whip out its sticky tongue and swallow her whole. Curiously, Kessa's legs were trembling as she climbed the red staircase that led to the entrance like a frog's tongue leading to its monstrous maw. She chalked the trembling up to the aftermath of the jailbreak. It certainly had nothing to do with who was inside the house. Taking a deep, fortifying breath, Kessa knocked on the vibrant blue doors. In a couple of minutes, a plump woman in her later years of life ripped the door open. A wild mass of lilac-colored hair was piled on her head, and smile lines crinkled the skin around her mouth and eyes. Purple eyes lit up at the sight of her. "Miss Candy Cane, and in full costume, too, how thrilling!" she exclaimed before Kessa had a chance to greet her. Grabbing the young woman, she yanked her inside and slammed the door. "I'm such a fan. I just love how you throttled Pinecone and annihilated Violet Crush," she gushed. "All my friends bet you wouldn't last." "She's a foreigner. She doesn't know our ways," they argued. "But me?" I said, "Just you wait and see. I know a natural-born mudflinger when I see one." She winked at Kessa as she literally hauled her down an ivy-colored hallway. "Great chase, but you're proving me right. You've won me enough coin to retire on. Not that I'd leave Hayland. Been with him since he was a wee lad." The woman nattered on as Kessa uttered unintelligible sounds that would have been words had they a chance to form. Eventually, they reached an archway that was constructed of thick, leafy vines and branches. Peering through the archway, Kessa gasped with fascination. Beyond that archway was a glade of lush green grass and wildflowers surrounded by towering trees. Above the canopy of leaves was a breathtaking view of the star-speckled mauve and indigo sky, which was visible through a glass dome ceiling. Frosted globes that glowed with the golden hue of candlelight hung about the room like mammoth fireflies. As well as lighting the area, they added warmth to the ambiance. Kessa's gaze ultimately landed upon the sizable collection of tall tree stumps, carved, sanded smooth, and fused together, which served as a dining table. Separate stumps, with added backs and cushions, served as chairs. Hayland, Pantheus, and Charlo were seated at the table, chatting amicably, oblivious to her presence and enjoying the peace and serenity the room elicited. "Hayland?" the older woman called, obliterating the serenity. "Looky who's here!" All eyes zoomed to Kessa. She felt her cheeks coloring, particularly when Pantheus leapt to his feet politely. Secretly, she wondered if he'd have done that if he knew who she really was. But then, his manners were always impeccable, formal occasion or not. Hayland Green, dressed in an avocado green robe with a darker green trim, waltzed over. Grasping her hand, he bowed elegantly. "Miss Red and White, welcome to the Frog Palace." He wasn't wrong. It was big enough to be a palace, and it resembled a frog. But it felt more like an enchanted wood than any palace. "Thank you for having me," she said, returning his bow with a courtesy. "Please, forgive my tardiness." "Pish!" Hayland led her by the hand to her seat at the table. "Charlo explained that you had a previous engagement with some fans, and you'd get here as soon as possible." Kessa courteously greeted Pantheus and Charlo and smiled her gratitude at the woman who'd led her there. Seeing that Hayland was pulling out a chair for Kessa, the lilac-haired woman left with a bubbly titter. Just as she was about to take her seat, Pantheus leaned forward intently and said, "Methinks there's a little extra red on you this evening, Miss Kane." Baffled by his odd observation, Kessa figured that he was referring to her flushed cheeks. She'd thought her mask would conceal them. Seeing everyone's confusion, Pantheus gestured to her midsection. "Candy!" Charlo exclaimed. "You're bleeding!" Kessa didn't need to look to know what they were talking about. Silently, she cursed her hasty patch job. Her rushed stitches must have torn as the older woman yanked her along the hallway. "It's nothing," she declared, seeing the concern on their faces. "A little training accident." She sat down abruptly. "Well, you've come to the right place," Hayland said. "Hayland's the best doctor in Fervor," Charlo explained. "In Renanin, actually. Lord Aegeon has come all the way from Akara just to learn from him." Kessa's gut clenched. She envisioned lying on an operating table with Pantheus sewing her up, while Dr. Green adjusted his thick, black-rimmed glasses and gave pointers. She imagined the questions they'd have about her wound and doubted that her explanation of a training accident would suffice. "I prefer healer sweetling," Hayland informed her humbly. "But I was referring to my equipment. Miss Kane is already in the best hands she could hope for." He bent his head toward Charlo. Kessa sighed in relief. She'd briefly forgotten that Charlo was a doctor. She'd been pretty preoccupied with the thought of Pantheus's hands on her. "Really, I am fine. I've delayed your dinner enough as it is. Dr. Finesse can patch me up later." "The only blood I want at my table is in the prime rib, dear girl," Hayland said. "You can't expect us to enjoy our meal while you sit there bleeding, can you? No. Go get fixed up and rejoin us. Do you remember the way to my examination room, Char?" "I do." Charlo stood up, motioned for Kessa to do likewise, and took a lit lantern from the table. "You'll find all you need in there." "What in Renanin's great swamp happened?" Charlo whispered as she led Kessa along the ivy-colored hallway. Kessa was too involved in the amazing features of the Frog Palace to answer her. They passed through a sunroom that was adorned with climbing roses and flowering vines. An inviting swinging bench for two was placed next to the wide glass door, which was open, allowing a fragrant breeze to grace their nostrils. Kessa could only guess who sat on that bench with Hayland. When Charlo lit the lanterns hanging about the examination room, it was a little bit of a shock. It was exactly what you'd expect a busy doctor's examination room to look like. It wasn't scenic or decked in plant life. There were sterile walls with shelves, cupboards, and counters with drawers, and more cupboards. Herbs, tinctures, and other medicines could be seen as Charlo searched the cupboards. A row of 5 metal examination tables attested to Green's busy schedule. After removing her mask, Kessa grabbed a gown off a hook on the wall, discreetly slipped out of her bodysuit, and put it on. Crawling onto the table, she lamented the red already staining the gown. "So, are you going to tell me what happened, or are you going to remain stoically silent?" Charlo laid a towel on Kessa to preserve her modesty as she lifted the gown to her midsection. The less you know, Doctor, the better. Kessa winced at her hack job of stitching. I was in a hurry, she responded to Finessa's critical glare. I've seen far worse, the doctor said, leaving her patient to wonder whether she meant the stitches or the wound. Perhaps she meant both. Dr. Finesse was highly economical, after all. You want something to numb the pain? She asked. At first, Kessa shook her head, but she reconsidered once the doctor started to remove her stitching. There's no trophy for suffering unduly, Finesse said, approving Kessa's choice. I have a topical that will numb the wound, and this you ingest, though I warn you it might make you a bit giddy. The first, Kessa said. She wanted nothing that might hamper her intellect, especially with Pantheus present. It's not going to affect the rest of the competition, is it? Her expressions switching as she contemplated the matter, Charlo shrugged. I'll do my best. Hayland does have some exceptional poultices. It is fortunate that you aren't competing tomorrow. It'll give you some time to rest and heal. She dropped the bloody string Kessa had used in the garbage disdainfully. I did disinfect it, Kessa protested, as Charlo brought over a bottle that smelt strongly of vinegar. She didn't want to experience that searing pain again, not if she could help it. And then you sewed it poorly, Finesse declared mercilessly as she poured vinegar on the wound. Kessa sucked air through her teeth and wiggled as she suffered the aftermath of vinegar sizzling against sliced flesh. Well, you'll like infection less, the doctor said with little sympathy. Charlo applied the numbing agent, threaded and heated her needle, and meticulously stitched up her patient. Then she coated the wound with one of Hayland's poultices and bandaged it thoroughly. Thank you, Kessa said sincerely, appreciating Finesse's skill. She wouldn't have to worry about the wound for the duration of the evening. Rest, you hear me? No theatrics or dramatic movements for tonight or tomorrow at least. Smirking, Kessa answered, Yes, Dr. Finesse. Removing the apron she'd donned for the surgery, Charlo hung it up. She poured fresh water from a pitcher into the wash basin and washed her hands scrupulously. After pouring the dirty water out the window, she smoothed those clean hands over her pink hair, intuitively knowing that it had become somewhat unruly. Then she set about tidying up and extinguishing most of the lanterns. Satisfied that the room was as tidy as it had been when she'd entered it, she rubbed her belly and suggested, Let's go eat, shall we? I'm starving. Roused by this statement, Kessa blinked several times. She didn't want to admit that while the doctor had stitched her up, she'd been drifting back and forth between sleep and consciousness. She was exhausted. Just the thought of climbing off the table and putting her bodysuit back on was overwhelming, never mind socializing. But then there was the dining. Food was always necessary, and Dr. Green had mentioned prime rib, a delicacy of which Kessa rarely partook. While the prospect of eating was usually incentive enough to get Kessa jetting, she was still sluggish. Even sitting up was a strain. Aware of her predicament, Charlo grabbed a container of pills from a cupboard and a cup of water from the drinking water dispenser, which contained slices of lemon, lime, and cucumber. Hayland spoiled his patience, that was for sure. Handing the pill and cup to her patient, she advised, This will help you endure this evening. Taking the proffered items, Kessa grinned cheekily, asking, Shouldn't I just rest? Swallowing the pill, she emptied the cup, licked her lips, then handed it back. This is one time I'm tempted to follow the doctor's orders. If you think you'll get much rest on a metal slab, Charlo retorted humorously, her pink eyes twinkling. After stabbing her fingers through her blonde locks to clear them from her face, Kessa cautiously leaned back on her elbows, admitting, "The way I feel right now, I think I could sleep on just about anything." "You wish to skip dinner?" Charlo asked incredulously. Sitting up again, the blonde said, "Good point." Her stomach growled, confirming just how good a point it was. "Take your time, girl," Charlo advised. "Dinner's waited this long. It can wait a little longer. I'll leave you to wash up and change. You know how to get back to the dining room?" Kessa nodded, valiantly trying to ignore the lightheadedness. Patting her patient's shoulder gently, Charlo left the room, shutting the door behind her. Sliding off the table, Kessa determinedly made her way over to the wash basin and, following Dr. Finesse's example, washed her hands. Dumping the dirty water out, she poured some fresh water into the basin and splashed it on her face. It was refreshing. Water dripping into the basin from her skin, she stood there for a couple of moments, contemplating her dim reflection before splashing herself a couple more times. Patting her face dry on her gown, she emptied the basin and slowly made her way over to her bodysuit and mask. Cautiously avoiding irritating her wound or the stitches, she dressed, throwing the dirty gown into a laundry hamper. Donning her mask, she wondered how long it would take for the pill to work. She didn't feel any spurt of energy, but perhaps just the fact that she was moving at all was a good indication the pill was working. Taking the lantern Charlo had left for her, Kessa headed for the dining room. Although only a mere 15 minutes had passed since Charlo had left, it felt a lot longer. Upon reaching the sunroom, she was surprised to see Pantheus swinging gently back and forth on the swinging bench. At the sight of her, he stood up. "I hope you don't find me presumptuous, but Charlo and Hayland were deep in conversation, and I thought, when you were ready, I'd escort you back to the dining room." "I'd like that," Kessa said, touched by his thoughtfulness. Initially, she'd thought his actions were purely chivalrous, but as he held out his arm for hers, she began to suspect an ulterior motive. Was his interest more than platonic? Or had he guessed her true identity? She didn't know which one was worse. "All patched up?" He gestured toward the bloodstain on her bodysuit. "Yes." She avoided the temptation to peer into his eyes. "Dr. Finesse is wonderful." "Hayland agrees with you. Did you know they attended school together?" "No. She didn't know much about them at all." "They did. Rumor has it they were competitive, too." "I bet." Kessa grinned. That much she knew. Finesse was very competitive. "And they remained friends." "Amazingly, because it doesn't even end there. Hayland was royal physician under King Cassius' father for years. He was awarded many bonuses because of his exemplary service. But as soon as Cassius took the throne, he replaced Hayland with Finesse." "Really?" "Yes, and still good friends." Kessa suspected Charlo's title of Mud Mistress had helped sway that decision, not that she doubted Finesse's ability or merit one bit. "That must have been a bitter pill to swallow for Dr. Green." King Cassius declared him Renanon's chief physician, an accolade that softened the blow. "Indeed, judging by his home." She swept a hand around, indicating the elegance and beauty that surrounded them. "The switch didn't hurt his pocket much either, and I'm sure he wouldn't have wanted to leave all this behind to move to Cyrene." "No," Pantheus agreed. "The switch benefited him more than it hurt him. King Cassius, knowing how much Green loved nature, gifted him this land, which boasts one of the finest and diverse forests in Renanon. He also provided the architect who designed the house. So, Hayland is happy with how things turned out." That's a relief. Underneath her stony exterior, Dr. Finesse is a caring soul. I'm sure she wouldn't have wanted to benefit at the expense of a friend. They walked a little in silence. Then Kessa asked, "Do you know if Dr. Finesse has been to the Frog Palace before?" "No. Why do you ask?" "Just wondering how she knew the way to Dr. Green's surgery." Pantheus grinned at her curiosity. "Before you arrived, Hayland gave us a thorough tour." "Oh, that makes sense." Silently, the two walked the rest of the way. "Ah, you made it back, Miss Kane," Hayland exclaimed as Pantheus and Kessa entered the dining room. "How are you feeling?" "Better," Kessa smiled. "Thank you for your generosity. Your clinic is impressive." "I'm glad you're feeling better. You're very welcome, and thank you." Hayland's teal eyes sparkled as he spoke. "Shall I let the kitchen staff know we're ready to eat?" "Please," Charlo blurted. Kessa didn't think she'd ever see anyone as enthusiastic for a meal as her, but Charlo sure came close. While Hayland went off to order the food, Pantheus leaned forward, divulging, "I can't hold this back any longer. The similarities between you and a girl I know are just too numerous to ignore." Charlo looked nervously at her companion, but Kessa, who'd mentally prepared for the possibility that Pantheus would suspect something, simply laughed. "I must have several doppelgangers out there, Lord Aegeon, given how many times I've heard that, Dr. Finesse?" "True," Finesse played along. "So, tell me about her. This girl I remind you of. Is she a close friend? A relative? A lover?" Kessa didn't catch how her voice switched its timbre on that last one. Charlo did, and she was now convinced that Kessa and Lord Aegeon were acquainted before Mudmania, and not just casually. For an inquisitive, in-the-know woman like Charlo, this knowledge was a can of worms popped open. Before Pantheus could reply, the food arrived. It was a feast in Kessa's view, and that was saying something. Her nostrils had caught the scent of fresh, buttered bread prior to it appearing on the table. Plates heaped with vegetables, salads, and cheeses came next, and then a platter of pork ribs, chicken wings, and finally a prime rib roast was placed in the center of the table. Kessa gasped with sheer pleasure, realizing that her earlier assessment of how Renonians ate was inaccurate. She found it difficult not to lunge forward and stuff her plate. Then, the cruelest, most horrible notion scourged her mind. She couldn't afford to provide any further proof of her identity to Pantheus. He knew when it came to food and eating, she was a chipmunk at a bird feeder, stuffing her cheeks to the brim, and he'd be watching. Suddenly, hating life, Kessa selected a scant amount of food and dropped it on her plate, trying her best not to visibly pout. Her self-discipline was rewarded when Hayland asked, "You're not hungry, Miss Kane? Is your wound affecting your appetite?" Pantheus's blue eyes scanned her plate thoughtfully. "Not at all. I normally don't eat very much. Just enough to fill my belly," she stated convincingly, though astute scrutiny of her tortured expression as she ogled the food revealed the contradiction. Fortunately for Kessa, no one was closely scrutinizing her, and her mask concealed a good deal too. "Please don't misunderstand. The food is delicious. You are a very generous host to serve us such a stupendous meal. I only wish I had the capacity." Only Charlo, who knew differently, picked up the trace of resentment in her voice. Realizing that Kessa was disguising her appetite because of present company, Charlo felt a stab of pity. "That's actually a very generous portion for Candy," she said, pointing to her plate. "I don't think my stomach is big enough for all I want to eat either. Such a marvelous spread of food. If you have too much left over, feel free to throw some my way. We don't get served this type of meal at the buffet tent." "Sweetling, I shall give you enough for another feast," Hayland declared. Smiling broadly, Charlo said thank you and commented on how munificent Hayland was as Kessa snuck her a glance of heartfelt gratitude. Just then, Hayland's servants brought in a jug which he announced was Theron cider, in honor of his Akaran guests. "Oh, great Athelos," Kessa thought. Clenching her fists under the table, she deliberated that this dinner was a torture far worse than any she'd endured. Well, almost. When the servant came to her goblet, she covered the top, refusing the drink. Biting her lip, she explained, "I mean no offense, Dr. Green. I realize how difficult it must have been to procure it. I'm just not a fan." "That's singular," Hayland exclaimed, his eyebrows jumping. "I didn't think there was an Akaran out there who didn't like Theron cider." "Until now, neither did I," Pantheus said. His expression softened as though he was experiencing a fond memory. "You recall that girl I mentioned? The one who Candy Cane reminds me of? Well, she'd brave a pack of wolves for a drop of Theron cider and a feast like this." It was an apt assessment. Kessa had to seal her lips to keep from salivating. In that instant, Hayland, Pantheus, and the servants morphed into a pack of ravenous wolves in her mind. Her hand jerked toward where her dagger normally was as she envisioned fighting off the furry beasts just for a swig, and, boy, would she savor it. But she was not in the forest, nor was she facing down any vicious animals. She was sitting at a civilized dining table, pretending to be someone she wasn't, all for the sake of keeping her identity secret, and Pantheus safe. There wasn't much she wouldn't do to keep him safe. But oh, how she would love some Theron cider. It seemed like ages since the sweet, pungent, flavorful cider had flooded her palate. Maybe just a sip. That wouldn't give anything away. She should honor her host, after all. "Really, Candy, you don't think you could imbibe just a little? What shall we toast with?" Charlo complained, coming to the rescue yet again. Kessa could have kissed her. "I could get her some grape juice," Hayland suggested. "No," Charlo said indignantly. "Candy." Pretending to consider the request, Kessa expressed her acquiescence. "If you insist, Dr. Finesse, in honor of our benevolent host, I shall have a cup, please." She did her best to curb her elation. "It's been a while since I've had any. Perhaps my taste buds have changed." Hayland beamed. "Excellent." He watched as his servant poured the mud wrestler half a goblet, then held up his in a toast. "To Mud Mania, an event that has brought us together." "Mud Mania," everyone repeated, and drank. Kessa savored hers, crinkling her nose in feigned distaste and coughing as she thudded her goblet down. "Oh my, that's strong." "As are you, Miss Kane," Hayland said. Not expecting the compliment, and touched by it, Kessa blushed. This compliment steered the conversation to the competition and how well Candy Cane was doing. Even the incident of mud flung onto the dais was mentioned. Pantheus was as good-natured about it as he'd been on the dais, admitting that he truly felt like a part of the competition. They were just starting to discuss the architect of Hayland's house when the latter's face lit up like a summer sunrise. He jumped out of his seat and rushed to the doorway. Everyone peered round to see what had snagged his attention. Framed beautifully by the vines of the entranceway was Violet Crush. Her simple but elegant mauve gown embraced her curves, air flowing to the floor. Her hair was down, blanketing her bare back in violet splendor. To his guest's surprise, Hayland folded his arms around the girl and locked his lips to hers in a passionate, prolonged kiss. After she'd recovered from her surprise, Kessa admired how harmonized their teal and violet hair looked together. Releasing the lip lock, Hayland said, "My heart-shaped jewel. I thought you couldn't make it." The couple walked hand in hand back to the table as Violet Crush explained that she'd escaped her trainer after she'd fallen asleep. "Violet's trainer is a cruel harpy," Hayland laughed. "Not like you, Mayhem." Her demeanor laced with good humor, Charlo quipped, "Don't be so sure." While gently nudging him with disapproval, Violet said Hayland's name, causing him to amend his comment to, "Her trainer's very strict." He pulled out a chair for her and tucked her in. "Violet isn't allowed to come home or visit anyone during all of Mudmania." "She wants me to focus solely on the competition." "I think she's jealous of me," Hayland winked. Violet flashed him a pearly white grin. "With good reason." "Violet needs no introduction, I trust." "Ah, the luxuries of having a famous wife." Charlo and Kessa gasped simultaneously, and their eyes found the glowing runes on the entwined fingers of their host and his wife. "Great Jace, Hayland." The mistress of Mud's tone was somewhere between indignant and joyous. "Why on the swamps of Renanin didn't you tell me you got hitched?" Hayland shrugged nonchalantly. "It never came up, sweetling." Her pink eyes sparkling, Charlo giggled as she leapt from her seat. "Indeed, and I guess your love of the unexpected has nothing to do with it. Well, congratulations." She placed a hand on Violet's shoulder, then kissed Hayland on the cheek. "When did the blessed event take place?" 2 years ago, Hayland answered definitively. "I just turned 22, Violet recalled. "It was a splendid birthday present." Hayland winked. "It's also easier to remember your birthday and our anniversary when they're so close together." Kessa was surprised that Violet was a year older than Equestria. She realized that when Violet had sat with her in the food tent, she'd craftily played up her youthfulness, making it seem like she was younger and less experienced than she really was. It gave her an edge over her opponents, specifically during Last One Left. Kessa had to admit she had perceived her as less of a threat after their discussion that morning. Clever Violet, she thought. "Another toast," Charlo commanded, grinning at Kessa. Kessa partook in the toast to the couple gladly, though her suspicious spy mind had geared up, planting a seed of bewilderment into her gut. Why would Hayland cheer her on and invite his wife's chief competitor to dinner? Perhaps her host's motives weren't altogether wholesome. She was suddenly relieved she'd only eaten a little. After all, if the food was poisoned, he'd successfully take out his old rival, Charlo, and his wife's opposition in one fell swoop. Or maybe he just wanted her sick enough that she couldn't mud wrestle. Why would he urge for her to be patched up as quickly as possible then? If left to fester, a laceration like hers could have prevented her from continuing in the contest. And would a doctor of his caliber, a doctor Pantheus obviously trusted, stoop to such a level? Kessa doubted it. Hayland didn't seem the vindictive or conniving sort, nor had she detected any poison, and she knew her poisons. Relaxing her shoulders, she decided to drop her suspicions and enjoy the rest of the evening. "Are you hungry, love?" Hayland gestured to the food. Violet shook her head. "That would be pushing it. Diet, husband dear. I'm on tender hooks just being here." The plump woman who'd opened the door and welcomed Kessa to the house strode into the room. "Oh, Vi, you're home. Are you here because Candy Cane annihilated you and you're out of the competition, or is it because you want a hunk of flesh?" With a tinkling of Belle's laugh, Violet embraced the woman. "It's good to see you too, Mama. And no, I'm still in the competition, and I don't want any hunk of flesh. Just visiting." "You'll have to step it up, girlie, if you want to beat Candy Cane." The woman chucked her daughter's chin. "Yes, I will," Violet smirked at Kessa. "How refreshing to have some real competition for a change." "I thought Pinecone was pretty close," the older woman said. Violet agreed. "She is doing very well this year." "Shall I clear the table, sir?" "Please. Could you pack a generous portion for our guests to take home too, please?" "My pleasure." "Before you judge," Violet said, "my mother insists on continuing to serve Hayland. She doesn't have to." "She's a hard worker, an asset to this house, and a beloved mother-in-law," Hayland added. "And the source of much happiness, it would seem," Pantheus observed tactfully. "Yes, certainly," Hayland patted his belly. "Best way to work off a meal like that is a walk. A lantern-lit walk around the grounds will do the trick." "A wonderful suggestion," Charlo approved, and it was. The grounds of the Frog Palace were every bit as enchanting as the house. Kessa wished she could see them during the daytime. About 1 kilometer from the house, they came upon a gargantuan tree. Its trunk was thick enough to fit a small house, and its branches spanned at least 15 meters in all directions. "Dr. Green!" Kessa exclaimed in awe. "What a magnificent tree!" Green's countenance radiated with pride and adoration. "Isn't she? I call her Aldona, though I don't rightly know why. It was like the name came to me, whispered on a breeze." Charlo reached out and touched the trunk affectionately. "It's been a long time, my old friend. It's wonderful to be with you again." "Ah, the times we used to spend under this tree, eh, Char?" Hayland reminisced. "I thought the king gifted you these lands." "Charlo and I grew up here, Miss Kane. As children, we used to come here to play. The king was generous indeed to gift me these lands after I asked for them." Pantheus walked around the tree, peering up to take in the beauty of its massive boughs. "She's magical," he breathed. "She has a powerful aura about her, undeniably," Violet agreed. "And so she should," Hayland said. "She's been around since the Dragnomaran." Again, that name. It sent tremors through Kessa's body as if she ought to have known it, or once had, and had long since forgotten. She'd had the same feeling when Violet mentioned it after their mud wrestling match. Violet chuckled. "Hayland exaggerates. The tree is old, but not that old." "Dragnomaran?" Kessa repeated. "Oh, that's right," Hayland said. "Akarans have forgotten all knowledge of the lore. Violet, would you do the honors?" "The Dragnomaran were a magical race," Violet began. "Othos and Isel, the mother and father of all dragons, created this planet, and with 3 of their offspring, nurtured the life that grew here and flocked to it. It is said that as they celebrated their creation, they cried tears of joy. These tears soaked into the earth, sprouting the first Dragnomaran. Since the Dragnomaran descended from Othos and Isel's emotional tears, they were extremely powerful and could live for 1,000 years or more. Once the dragons departed, the Dragnomaran ruled the planet and its people. The inhabitants were divided into 5 major races: the Dragnomaran, the Caters, the Foragers, the Furries, and the Macyrs. The Dragnomaran and the Caters were magical, while the other races were not. The Dragnamaren were by far the most powerful. Some say they even had power over death in some cases. At first, they were generous, caring, and judicious. But as time went on, a conviction of superiority crept into their psyches. After 2,000 years, they became so arrogant and prideful that they refused to mingle with any of the other races other than in governance. A large fortress was built to keep others out and to keep their people in. They cruelly punished any Dragnamaren that associated with what they called unpotent, even going so far as to execute those caught intimately involved with someone from another race. It was a recipe for disaster. You can imagine the strain this caused, as many Dragnamaren didn't agree with the ostracization. They feuded amongst themselves endlessly, and more than a few of the feuds ended in bloodshed. A lot of it. Eventually, their progeny dwindled until only a couple thousand remained. Then, the Kators— Violet paused and looked at her audience. You know of the Kators, right? The race born of Othos's tears of grief when Icel disappeared shortly after the creation. They're called magistrates now. She checked for confirmation. They perform marriages, baby naming, fertility evocations, and divorces, right? Pantheus verified. Yes. Well, though their magic was second and different to that of the Dragnamaren, they were powerful too. They were born from the tears of grief Othos shed for a century after Icel disappeared. Jealous and threatened by the Kators' power, the Dragnamaren had enslaved them after the dragons left. When the Dragnamaren became too domineering, power-hungry, and brutal, the Kators revolted, and it resulted in a bloodbath that decimated both races. The remaining Dragnamaren formed a tight-knit group. These few were so ashamed of what their kinsfolk had done that they decided the world was far better off without them. They withdrew and faded into obscurity. Some speculate that the oracles of legend are their descendants. The Kators circulated with the unpotent until their identities were ultimately intermingled and muddled. An interesting story, if anything, Charlo said. I'm unfamiliar with it. Violet grinned in response. More familiar than you think, Charlo. Legend has it the Dragnamaren put a spell on Akaran's soil, so all who step foot upon it forget about them. Probably because they're hiding somewhere in Akara and want no one to find them. After your relocation to Akara, Charlo, your memory of this history was wiped clean. Shrugging, Charlo didn't refute Violet's assertions. And yet, while you were telling the history, a memory was stirred. Wasn't there a sixth race? Not quite a race. They didn't have the numbers. This unnamed group of people were said to have been crafted from some of Othos's claws. They aren't mentioned much, and little is known about them, so few believe they ever really existed. From what little is written, it is believed that after Othos cried over Icel's disappearance, he clawed the earth, swearing he would find her. Several of his claws lodged into the dirt and grew into unique people with unique gifts. Othos declared them guardians. Of what exactly is unknown. Since the documentation on them is so scant, it's theorized that, if they did exist, they were probably slain by despotic Dragnamaren or Kators, but no one knows for sure. How interesting, Pantheus mused. I'll say, Kessa concurred. Violet touched Eldona's trunk affectionately. The stories you could tell us if you could talk. Indeed, Hayland grasped his wife's hand. I love your retelling of history. He turned to his guests. Violet is a brilliant historian when she isn't mud wrestling. As the others continued their walk, Kessa hung back, not ready to leave Eldona's presence. She sat on a large root protruding from the earth. She stayed there at the base of the trunk, listening as the breeze rustled the leaves. The spot certainly had a magical feel, which Kessa drank in like Theron's cider. Moments later, she was blinking repeatedly until she realized that the opaque mist now surrounding her wasn't an illusion or trick of the eyes. An odd blue glow illuminated the mist like the moon itself was just out of reach. Fireflies flitted about like fairies, enchanting the atmosphere with serenity. The peace was unlike anything Kessa had ever felt before. Her soul wanted to embrace it and never let go. A tall figure emerged from the oblivion beyond the curtain of mist. It was a man. His clothing was regal, as was his bearing. A velvet, fur-lined, eggplant-colored cloak hung off his broad shoulders. A silken, knee-length tunic the color of ivory graced his body, along with dark pants and shoes. A golden crown rested on his head, beneath which was neatly combed, shoulder-length, dark blonde hair. He was handsome, with a powerful aura that prompted Kessa to bow her upper body. The feeling that accompanied her bow was a complete reversal from how she felt while bowing to Cassius. The man before her was a worthy king, in every sense. She intuitively knew it, and she felt privileged to bow to him. He smiled, made a furling gesture with his hand, and bowed back to her benevolently. Basking in his magnificent presence, Kessa couldn't shake the feeling that she knew him, or should know him at least. The fireflies were flitting about oddly, forming two small, golden circles in front of her. His finger pointing at her, the man said, "The key." His voice was melodic and warm, comforting. Kessa looked at the rings, bewildered. She'd seen them before, the night she'd walked home with Lord Fane. "What do they mean?" The circles glowed brightly before the fireflies dispersed. When she realized her mysterious companion was fading back into the mist, Kessa cried, "Please don't go." Despite her plea, he vanished, leaving Kessa genuinely bereft. But she heard his voice one last time. "Find me. Free me." "Miss Kane?" Disorientation struck. The mist swirled. "Miss Kane." Opening her eyes, Kessa realized she'd drifted off. Was it all another dream, then? Her vision snapped to Pantheus, peering down on her. "I'm sorry to wake you, Miss Kane, but it's getting late, and I wouldn't want you left out here all alone." Climbing to her feet, Kessa winced at how sore she was. Dusting herself off, she looked around inquisitively. Reading her mind, Pantheus told her, "The others are back at the house already. I tend to be a bit of a worrywart." His looking her up and down with concern cemented this confession. Kessa grinned at this understatement. "Nothing to worry about here, my lord." "I know you're more than capable. I admit there is some self-gratification involved." "Oh?" "I enjoy your company." He winked at her and flashed a cheeky grin. "Hey." Pantheus reached out to brace her as she tottered dangerously. "You sure you're okay?" Mortified, Kessa straightened her posture, wondering why her knees had almost given out. "Shall we return to the house?" she suggested. Pantheus waved a hand forward. "Lead the way." Uncomfortable with silence and worried about talking too much, Kessa found herself between a rock and a hard place. Staying in character, she urged discussion about how breathtaking the grounds were and how intriguing the house was. But Pantheus, again, proved as resistant to petty chatter as she was. In the end, there were long pauses in their conversation, but it wasn't as painful as she'd predicted. Realizing that Pantheus was no longer in step with her, Kessa turned around and saw him clip a beautiful white rose, and then an equally beautiful red rose from the bushes laden with gorgeous blooms. He passed them to her, commenting that they matched her costume. Kessa smiled as she inhaled their enchanting scent. Then she frowned, as an irrational suspicion overcame her. Was Pantheus falling for Candy Cane? Great Athelos, what exactly was she feeling? Was she jealous of herself? Why was she jealous? She immediately dismissed the feeling as more concern than jealousy. She didn't want Pantheus developing feelings for a girl that didn't exist. At least, she tried to dismiss the feeling.
"Please, allow me to be frank, Miss Kane," Pantheus said, sensing her alarm. "I'm not trying to court you. I apologize if I'm being too forward. It's just that you remind me of—"
A wistful expression crossed his face, and he abandoned the end of his sentence.
"Don't misunderstand me. I take pleasure in our conversations, and think you deserve those roses. I just don't want you to get the wrong impression."
"Fair enough," she said, as the raging bulls inside stopped seeing red. Kessa smelt her roses until they reached the front steps of the house. Prior to opening the door, Pantheus admitted,
"You know, I still can't shake the feeling that I know you."
Sniffing her roses to give her time to formulate a reply, Kessa said, "Well, I am a fellow Akaran in a sea of Renonians. It's only natural to sense familiarity." He tilted his head to the side thoughtfully. Then he shrugged.
"I suppose that's one explanation."
"Earlier, you mentioned the girl I remind you of."
"Yes, at first. But you two are not as alike as I first assumed."
Relief flooded Kessa. She'd successfully deceived him. A tiny pinch of guilt salted her relief, but was quickly swept aside because if he'd discovered her true identity, he'd be in even more danger than he was now. He opened the door and waited for her to enter. "It's been lovely spending time with you, Lord Guion, and I truly appreciate the roses." The corner of his mouth curved as he said,
"There is one thing I am certain you and that girl I know have in common."
"What's that?"
"Trouble."
Kessa laughed. "I think we could agree on that."